All right, so we're going to just think in this first session a little bit about the context of 1 Peter, and really we're just going to zero in on the first 2 verses. Nice easy start. I'll let Andy pick up everything else in the next session. He won't do the whole thing next session, but he'll have a little bit more to cover. But we're going to think about the kind of the framing of the letter, or at least the introduction at the very start of the letter, specifically asking ourselves what is going on in terms of the context, right? What is the context of these people that Peter was writing to? Because it seems to me that the more we can recognize what was going on then, the more we can relate to them, and therefore the more the letter itself will impact us. Okay, and that's true on lots of levels, especially with the epistles. But I think it's sometimes we can just kind of take a very vague sense of connection to epistles. This was written to Christians. We're Christians, and then we carry on. But actually, sometimes the very specific, unique situations that the letters are written to help us to relate and understand at a different level. Okay, so let me show you what I'm thinking here. Okay, looking at the letter frame, I don't know, we'll take maybe 20 minutes to kind of ponder this, give it a little bit of background, but then I want you to really be discussing this in your groups, thinking about their context and ours. So these are what I've got on the screen is essentially almost exactly what's in the PDF that's on the website. Okay, so feel free to use the PDF during or after, it's up to you. But it is there for you. And here we go. The first part, these are the first 2 verses. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, according to the foreknowledge of God the Father, in the sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience to Jesus Christ and for sprinkling with his blood, may grace and peace be multiplied to you. So you recognize the pattern: author, recipients, and then a greeting. That's fairly straightforward. But specifically what I want us to zoom our thoughts into are the location details that I've underlined there. So he's writing to people who are elect exiles of the dispersion, the diaspora, in 5 places. I'm not going to show you a map, but those 5 places are spread out across what we would call Turkey. Okay, so basically from the mountains in the east, slightly north of there, and right the way across the Turkish, I guess it's a peninsula, quite a large one, but 5 regions of Turkey. And Peter is writing to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion. Now, if you look at commentaries and look at the background that tends to get presented for 1 Peter, the majority view seems to be that the place names may have some significance in the sense that he was thinking about people who happen to be there. But it often feels like the commentators kind of decide that elect exiles of the dispersion is some sort of generic title for Christians, right? Just, it's Peter's fancy way of saying to the saints who happen to be in these 5 locations. Now, we could accept that and we can work with that, but it's very vague. And essentially, if that's the approach we're going to take, we could almost say to Christians anywhere, right? But I'm convinced that there's a little bit more going on. Peter is a unique letter because he keeps using the language of foreigner or exile all the way through. He uses a theme that really isn't a normal theme in the New Testament writings, as if it's a perfect fit. And so while we could take that sort of thematic idea that all Christians are foreigners in this world, or we are exiles in this world, that there's a sense in which that's true. I think there's something richer, more specific that's going on here. Okay, so let me just give a little bit more background to that. You got this other reference from chapter 2. Sorry, I can't actually get to it. Someone want to read? I've hidden it with your faces and I can't move that image at this point. Someone want to read verse 11 from chapter 2 out loud for us?
Beloved, I urge you as journeyers and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. So yeah, I urge you as sojourners and exiles. There's that exiles word again, to abstain from the passions of the flesh and so on. So he uses this language of exile at the beginning here. He makes a reference to Babylon in chapter 5, which could be referencing Rome, of course. We can look at that when we get to it. But this is kind of the language that's being used in 1 Peter. Okay, so a little bit of background for us. Where did these believers come from? Like, why are there believers in Turkey? Within this time frame of the 1st century, there's very little evidence of effective evangelism in most of these regions. Obviously, Paul did go into some of them. So yeah, you got the 1st missionary journey, you got the 3rd missionary journey where he spends some time in Asia Minor, but we don't have evidence of effective evangelism taking place in all 5 of these regions of Turkey. Now, some of them were represented at Pentecost, but still the question remains, how has it happened? And it seems like historically the big issue is Roman colonization. The Romans deliberately putting people from outside into that part of the world. So in order to Romanize, to make Roman an area in terms of language and culture and politics, to provide military presence, to foster commerce between distant places, the Roman Empire kind of grew by strategic planting of colonies. Okay. Claudius, the emperor from 41 to 54, colonized Asia Minor and put cities in all 5 regions that are mentioned here. Like he is particularly the emperor that seems to have achieved the most in terms of that region. And so the fact that he put cities, Roman colonies in all 5 regions is noteworthy. It's worth recognizing that that's happened. Now, how did they get the people? Well, they tended to be populated by motivated citizens or freed slaves volunteering, or by troublemaking foreigners moved en masse from Rome. Okay, so there's different ways to put somebody in a colony. So for example, in Acts chapter 16, Paul comes to Philippi, which is in Macedonia, and he is kept in jail overnight by the jailer. The jailer is very likely to be a Roman citizen, probably a Roman soldier that is retired and has chosen to live in Philippi because that gives him more standing, gives him a stable situation, it probably gives him some land, some benefits, and he just has this little duty of keeping prisoners locked up. That's not guaranteed, but that's very likely. And so sometimes you'll have people that choose to colonize, almost like there's a call. We need to colonize this region. If you go, we'll give you some land, we'll give you some privileges, you will be influential, and probably even more significantly, your children will be influential. And so people would choose that. Slaves that are freed might choose to go and start a new life in a place with some kind of provision from the empire. Or, and this is the one that's probably most relevant to 1 Peter, if there were troublemakers, groups in Rome that were a problem, sometimes they would just be moved as a group into a different location in order to build up a colony. It'd be better for them because they would have some kind of share in what's going on there. But also it would deal with the problem from Rome's perspective, because big, powerful governments sometimes want to reduce population. Okay, so the qualification for deportation, for being moved like that, was essentially, if you're not a Roman citizen, we'll move you and we might make you one. Not necessarily guaranteed to make you one, but there's that sense of the problem people here, let's get rid of them. And the problem people here, by definition, tend to be the foreigners. Okay, so it could be that these people that Peter's writing to are people that have been deported from Rome because they're considered foreigners and troublemakers. Peter himself had association with or presence in Rome from 42 to 67. So Peter's connection with Rome is quite substantial. I think sometimes in history, the Protestant church has tried to sort of undo Peter's connection to Rome because it's a little bit awkward, you know, in terms of the first pope and all that kind of idea from the Catholics. But the reality is he did have a lot of connections with Rome. So in terms of kind of how that worked then, in AD 49, Claudius expelled a group of Jews from Rome because they were connected to this character Chrestus. Now, most people looking at that will say, yeah, that expulsion of Jews was because of Christ, misspelling of the word Christ. We see a reference to that in the book of Acts, of course, with Priscilla and Aquila being moved out of Rome. And so if that's what happened, that there were a group of people who were maybe followers of Jesus. Now, they could have been Jewish or Gentile, by the way, but they were considered to be a kind of a sect or a group within Judaism. If that's what's going on, then you've got people expelled from Rome because of being a problem. There's some kind of tensions, some difficulties in the city. In very simplistic terms, Claudius said, these Jews that are following Chrestus are the problem, let's get rid of them. And maybe it's those people that have been sent into these regions in Turkey. So when they were in Rome, they were considered foreign and problematic. Now they're in Turkey, in Asia Minor. What are they there? Well, they're foreigners, right? They're people who have come in from the outside. They may have land, they may have influence, they may have some sort of privileges, but where do they get those from? Well, the Roman army has stolen that from the locals. And so these people who were considered a foreign problem in Rome are now considered a foreign problem in Turkey. And if that's actually the situation, and I'm fairly convinced it is, not certain because we don't know for certain, but it just makes so much sense, that would help us to understand why Peter's writing to them and talking to them in terms of suffering, in terms of persecution, in terms of being able to answer when people are giving you a hard time, but they see that you have some hope in you. All of the content, submission to authorities and suffering and service and so on, all of the content of 1 Peter, I think, makes sense in light of this twice foreign kind of situation. We were not wanted in Rome, we were kicked out. We're not wanted here, we're suffering. Now, the big suffering doesn't come probably until AD 89 or 90, into the sort of Domitian period of suffering. But there's already tensions in the 50s, 60s, whenever 1 Peter was written. There's already tensions. This would make sense of that. Now, it's true that, and this is what commentators will often say, Christ's people suffer as foreigners in this world. That's true for all of us. I'm British living in Great Britain, but I am a foreigner because my citizenship is in heaven. So on a spiritual level, it's true for all of us. But I think 1 Peter is richer if we have a richer sense of what was going on in terms of that context. Okay. So here's a little quote from Karen Job's commentary. Let me just Don't know if you can see that or not, but it's in this series, the Baker series. I would tell you to go and look on the book table, but it's probably not, you may not have a book table in your house. So not only were those deported from Rome often foreigners, i.e. not citizens of Rome, but they were often viewed as foreigners at their destination as well. Because colonists immigrating from Rome generally benefited from resources often confiscated from the local indigenous population, and because that should be colonists enjoyed the official sanction of Rome, they were naturally viewed as foreigners by the native populations, and at times with great resentment. Sometimes colonists even became a target of violence and persecution by the native population. Okay, so just before we go into our groups, let me just show you this list. I found this really helpful. 7 distinct problems in Christian communities suffering from social pressure. Okay, so you can look this up if you want to, but this is just a useful list. If you put yourself back in Peter's day, a group of Christians that are suffering from social pressure, these are some of the problems that they'll face. We've got physical and psychological pressure. Okay, number 2, social ostracism. That means being separated and sort of pushed out of social life, exclusion. Number 3, potential pull from the former pagan way of life. So there's that sense of being pulled back to a way of living. They're feeling the pressure, and so it sometimes just seems easier to go back to the old ways. A surrounding seductive non-Christian worldview. It's quite hard, isn't it, when everyone around you views the world differently. That can be quite a challenge. And number 5, tensions and inconsistent behavior within the fellowship. Think about a gathering of believers under pressure. They can very easily have pressures and tensions with each other. People leaning towards one way of handling it might disagree very strongly with people who handle the situation in a different way. Maybe some of us are seeing that now in a way that maybe we haven't before. We'll come back to that. Number 6, spiritual doubts about the reliability of God's promises in the future. When suffering is present and real, it's natural and it's understandable that people may start to doubt. It's easy to be committed to God's promises and to celebrate God's faithfulness when the reality is that, well, life's easy. But when life's tough, there are naturally those moments of doubt that creep in. Number 7, Satan's constant deadly temptations and trials. Now, some of those things are true at any time, but it's just increased, isn't it, when a community is suffering from social pressure, when you've got a community of believers and all around the external culture is opposed to them for some reason, because they're there, because of who they are, because of what they believe, and so on.